questions for Pieter. Your existential questions relate to a rather unitary sense of self, given that Kevin Warwick and his wife were linked quite directly through the nervous systems. I just wondered if you'd thought about notions of collective identity in your transhumanist existential future.
My question relates to the previous ones about government. Basically, what do you think about other governments, specifically something like China, more or less investing lots of money and essentially setting the standard for what happens in the future? The same variant comes with wealthy individuals as well, because they might essentially set up something which becomes a standard and therefore control.
Okay. I'd love to. Are we sure that's
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, and it actually relates to a point I had to cut out of this presentation, because while Sartre is the philosopher to have quoted the little aphorism, to have created the little aphorism, "We are convicted to be free." Pieter Sloterdijk, German philosopher, embroiled in this big controversy over enhancement. He said, well, we have also to consider the fact that we are convicted to be convicted to trust, in the sense that when we allow for genetic engineering of children, of course there is a great new sphere of freedom, and there is also a great new sphere of being predetermined by other intentional acts. The children will be intentionally produced by their parents. And I think what may come out of that, and that's a position I've not read that much about, is in fact a kind of clan-like group psychology. It may well re-emerge. Like in medieval times, there was much more of a collective identity based on an occupational life choice. Maybe that will re-emerge, that you might as well imagine groups being these genetic communities really created to do a kind of life, and that maybe that also solves the existential crisis for those children, because then they would just be produced with this drive to be a lumberjack, and they would just be insanely happy about being a lumberjack. And so maybe that might solve the problem. And in our current Western civilization like Jürgen Habermas, he panics over exactly this kind of thing, that people would have this drive created by others, but maybe really that is quite a good existential solution. Just you want to be a lumberjack because your parents made you so.
We have a question at the back about the...
I've got to say, I have a certain amount of sympathy with what Pieter said. I think there are days when I would like to want to be a lumberjack. On the political questions that Didier mentioned, first of all, with regard to universality of access, as I mentioned, I think the question actually is one that doesn't really need solving in the developed world, because the economic imperative to ensure that one minimises the extent of age-related ill health is going to be so unequivocal. It's going to be economically suicidal for any country not to make sure that these therapies are available, because they will pay for themselves so enormously quickly and many times over. But in the developing world, I think the situation is a great deal more complex, as I mentioned towards the end of my talk. And actually, really, the only the only conclusion I've come to is that the first step in ensuring universality of access in the developing world is to improve the perception of the value of life that exists in the developing world. I often point to the example of Thabo Mbeki here, where it's pretty unlikely that the head of state of a Western nation would actually be head of state for very long if they publicly avowed that HIV didn't cause AIDS, but that's what happened in South Africa, and one has to explain this, I think, in terms of a very different attitude of the population to the way that, to the value of life. Then again, of course, one could argue that maybe it's a good thing that they don't value life so much because they don't have much chance to have much of it. In terms of the European Union, I think that the situation is quite optimistic. I've been asked to take part in workshops looking at the world 20 years out that were run by the European Union, and I was quite surprised that such workshop existed at all. So I think that at least there are some people in the bureaucracies of the EU that are thinking in these terms, and I'm hoping that thinking will continue. That's really what I would say.
We should quick word to China. Are they going to bring us to everywhere?
No, absolutely not. We've got a secret source in our rocket that we're not telling anyone about, which is why they're not going to beat us. I can't say any more than that, otherwise people will come at you from the door.
Stealth rocket technology as well. Excellent. Okay, we are running out of time, so if people have additional questions, people should be around over coffee, hopefully, and tackle them there or later on. If everyone